The whole investment world is caught up in the SpaceX frenzy. The shares came to the market as over $1 trillion listing. It's now over $2 trillion. But how much of it is hype and how much of it should we be taking credit as South Africans? Because there is a South African who's put it all together. Sy Jacobs will be giving us his insights in a moment. Well, Sy, you have been saying that Tesla is a short. In other words, the stock one should not be investing in and one that you should be selling. It's been bouncing all over the place. But is that a Tesla thing or an Elon Musk thing, or does it translate through to SpaceX? Or where are we in all of this?
Right. So what I've worked out, good morning, Alex, what I've worked out over time, it's not necessarily that these companies are a short. It's the fact that Elon Musk has absolutely mastered and cracked the code of the market structure of how to IPO these things, how to create a small free float, how to control that free float via options, via passive index buying, via understanding exactly what makes up that float. And over time, the fundamentals of a business are not actually following through to the valuation in these two particular share prices. I mean, SpaceX, I've always believed, Tesla was a phenomenal business. Elon Musk is a genius of an individual. But that business over the last few years has deteriorated substantially in cash flow, in operating margins, gross margins, in number of vehicles sold, in every metric you look at in the delivery of full service driving, which hasn't materialized, where others are ahead of him. And all of this has culminated in the share price actually going up over time. Yes, it has stalled a little bit because there is quite a reasonable amount of float and it's hard to control everything. And the news has been so dire that the stock has failed to reach new highs, let's say, over the last few months. But it is still $1.4 odd trillion for a company that is hardly making any money. And now comes along his next investment, SpaceX, which if you look at, makes 19 billion of annual sales and gets now a 2 trillion valuation, becomes the fifth largest company in the world after IPO. This is a result of market structure where you only list 4.3% of the equity and you make rules around that 4.3% of the equity. Everybody's tied up, including him. He's tied up for 1 year. The balance of all the investors that have funded all the various rounds for 15 or 20 years are tied up in totally at the moment. They will get a small amount of release after the first set of results at the beginning of August. And then slowly a little bit of stock gets added to the market. But this is particularly well thought out and structured because as those amounts become listed or moved to the market, so the passive index buying continues. One of the big things, for example, that Elon Musk did prior to this listing is he convinced NASDAQ, for example, which normally has a full 1 year trading history to make it into that index. He convinced them of a 15-day fast inclusion period if he were to come to market. So what is happening now, after 15 days, SpaceX will have an inclusion in the NASDAQ, and it will be one of the largest companies, maybe even the largest by the 15th day. Who knows? And he convinced them that the free float multiplier, which obviously gets downweighted because SpaceX only listed less than 5% of its equity, that free float must be multiplied by 3 in the calculation to work out what goes into the index. So we got a situation here where, in my opinion, and I've been reading about the Tesla market structure for ages, and I studied exactly what makes up the SpaceX structure. This is really not about fundamentals of the business. You can promise whatever you want. Those promises haven't materialized over the years, both at Tesla and at SpaceX. But this one is actually just amplifying the ridiculousness of a listing. I mean, that's what it is.
But many people in South Africa know you and deeply respect you on this. But why aren't the Americans clicking to this? It sounds to me a little bit like what we had in this country with Tygon, with Gary Porritt, and he had a tiny, tiny free float, and of course that all ended in tears, in a lot of tears. Are we seeing a repeat here?
Yeah, I think the difference with Gary Porritt and Targon is that the numbers were fraudulent. So this is not a fraud. The business exists. The business has exciting one-off opportunities that nobody else has, But does that materialize into profit? Not necessarily. It hasn't in the past. Yes, they have one very good business, Starlink. But if you had to value Starlink and even give it the most absurd multiple, you wouldn't get to probably 20 or 30% of SpaceX's value. Then you've got this whole XAR Grok, which was the roll-up of all the the data businesses and AR together with the old Twitter, which is X, which was really, really struggling, but got rolled into SpaceX just before the listing, at almost $250 billion. And you add that as well to the rocket launch business, which, yes, is exciting and fun and, has contracts with government and has contracts with corporates, etc., but has never made money. It's very expensive. Rocket fires, go wrong, etc. Is that a business you really want to invest in for return? So, this is three big businesses together. The only thing I would say to you is, would I short it? Definitely not, because the market structure doesn't allow it. In fact, this could go just like SpaceX rockets. This could go to the moon because options, for example, started trading yesterday for the first time on SpaceX. The volume was so big that 60% of the IPO stock traded again yesterday in the market, which is crazy. I give you some interesting things as well. All the various disciplines for this listing were put in place before so intelligently. So, for example, if you were a client at Fidelity or Robinhood or Sophie or E-Trade, you were actually warned that if you flipped the stock, you would not get any other further IPOs. And we know we've got some great IPOs like Anthropic and OpenAI that may be knocking on the door. So you were actually warned that if you were given stock, you were not, in fact, allowed to sell it, which I find, and this is the largest IPO that's ever happened in the history of the market, but at the same time, the tiniest float that's ever happened. So, I'm not sure how this was, to be honest, allowed to happen. Why is America not stopping it? Because everybody's incentivized by it. There have been multiple raisings of equity over the years, and nobody's really lost out here. This is money created out of nothing. If you can sell some of your shares at a 2.3 or 2.4 trillion valuation, this is a get-rich scheme that obviously is mostly going to Musk, but is also going to a lot of corporate America, a lot of very high net worth individuals who are very connected in the private equity and pre-IPO space. And, it's a get-rich scheme. And, a lot of retail jumped on board, on the IPO on the day of the listing, but really that's just because of the hype, and that's a very small component of who owns SpaceX.
I was looking at some of the valuations over the last 24 hours and thinking back, it's not that long ago that we had our very first $1 trillion company. Now we got a whole host of them, multiple $1 trillion. What's going on here, Sai, and how's it all going to end?
Well, I think the one, big issue that the world never really anticipated, and it's maybe good because it's made a lot of investors in the world, rather wealthy over time, is the construct of active versus passive. In other words, passive being those who track the various indices, and then more and more of those being listed every single day. You've got Vanguard and Vanguard, I think, is running 12 trillion US dollars. There's continual money being fed into the passive indices, and those have to buy the top stocks. So today, when you look across these companies that are worth $1 trillion, 2, 3, besides SpaceX, the others are mostly held by passive ETFs. Those are the big shareholders, and those continue to buy. So, are they really in touch with reality? Is someone looking at the underlying fundamentals and saying, oh, well, you know what, let's not buy Microsoft today. We think that the numbers might be disappointing. No, it's based on size and based on the flow that keeps going into these passive ETFs. So the market construct has changed materially. It's really, to be honest, not that much to do with active valuations, particularly in America, in these top companies. So, I'll give you a prime example now. I just took some notes before. Microsoft and SpaceX are of similar size today in market cap. Microsoft has sales of 318 billion, right? Revenue 318. SpaceX 19. So, these companies, in fact, SpaceX doesn't make it into the top 600 companies in the world, even from a revenue perspective, never mind a profit perspective, because it actually makes losses. Microsoft makes approximately 125 billion a year, dollars in profit. SpaceX loses 9. So why would these two companies be valued the same? People will say, oh, well, AI's taking away Microsoft. We're not about to lose Microsoft. They're also in the AI world. But SpaceX, the valuation of SpaceX is not being determined by what is going to come. It's being determined by a simple thing, market structure.
Keep very few of the shares available to the public, make sure that they all get terribly excited about it, and then they will overvalue because it's supply and demand, I guess, on that perspective. That it's simple as that.
And there's been another thing where there has been a lot of literature written, and that's around options, shorter dated options, call options. On the first day of trading options for SpaceX yesterday, the options market set a record for the amount of options traded post an IPO. The previous record was when Facebook listed. The record was absolutely smashed yesterday. And the options were, basically 2-to-1 call options to put options. In other words, they were bullish options. Bearish options, bear in mind, doesn't mean you're necessarily going short. You could be, for example, just capping your upside as well. So a lot of people who, let's say, bought SpaceX shares in the IPO would sell options against it at higher prices to because the volatility of these options, the volatility of SpaceX was so high that you could get a lot of income out of selling options in SpaceX. But we've seen call options in size trade as high as at $335. There were some call options bought within, on the first day of option trading. And these are short dated options that are going to expire at the end of this week and the end of next week. So what happens when the underlying option writer effectively allows you to buy that option, they have an element of SpaceX shares they need to buy to hedge themselves in case the share were to reach 335. And if that share starts to creep, they have to keep buying more shares to ensure they're not out of pocket at the time SpaceX reaches 335 and maybe goes higher. So a lot of these, the market structure is determined by the free float, by the options, by the amount of passive buying, and how much is actually available. And, I really believe Elon kind of almost mastered this fully with Tesla, understood how this worked, and saw the demand from options, saw how much the float was controlled, and realized, now I can bring the super one to the market. Now I can bring the one and structure it perfectly, that this won't fall dramatically. And the big thing about having this company not fall is he can now use that script, obviously, at the ridiculously inflated prices to buy other businesses. Maybe even Tesla. The market's saying, well, Tesla's a bit in trouble, selling less cars, FSD's not working, he's just spinning more and more stories, talking about $1 trillion robot opportunities where those robots are really far behind. So maybe the opportunity now is try get them into one business. Then you've got this monolithic, biggest business in the world from a market cap point of view. probably won't really wash its face. Net probably doesn't make money with the two of them together. But then he has the opportunity of issuing equity to slowly buy businesses that are actually good businesses, profitable businesses. So it could become self-fulfilling in time. So that's where we stand. To me, the market's broken when it comes to looking at these two businesses. But would I short them? No.
But he's already done his first transaction, a 60 billion rand purchase of a startup. So it appears as though your thinking has already been confirmed.
Yeah, I think I think that's starting. Look, you got to give him credit. You know, people made a fortune of money in Tesla. If you made the money, you are a believer. You've seen that regardless of it not materializing into growing profits and growing margins, the share price hasn't been smashed. So you keep believing that, this is the way. He is the god of the god of the market, and you need to be on his side. And that's proven to be correct over time. So, who am I to say you mustn't go with it? All I'm saying, it's really just not based on the underlying profitability of these businesses.
So what could go wrong?
I think you could get a couple of things. Regulators could wake up and say, we've been duped here. We never realized what had happened. We gave a fast track into NASDAQ and we allowed the free float to be multiplied. Interestingly enough, the S&P said to Musk, we're not accepting you make losses and we're going to wait a full year. So at least it never went into that index as well. It also is going into the MSCI, CRSP, and the FTSE Russell. And those four combined, including NASDAQ alone, are about 30 to 40% of the amount of the IPO stock that was listed. So that's one component besides the options, besides the retail frenzy. So you could get in a situation, I don't think it will happen, but maybe regulators wake up and say, we might have to reverse this or force some selling from some of the locked up investors to make the market more real or more indicative of a true market with buyers and where there is enough sellers to satisfy the demand, or it or it continuously goes up, and eventually Elon can buy up anything he wants, and we have one very, very large company in the world.
Sure.
I think also it's a very interesting, if you look at some of the steps, it's so genius, some of the steps that were taken pre the listing. So, for example, if you had brokers that were negative on Tesla, JP Morgan had an analyst who had a very low valuation on Tesla. He saw it going backwards. Interestingly enough, just a couple of weeks before the SpaceX listing, that analyst was removed. A new analyst put on the job. The target price increased way above the spot price. And then JP Morgan included, obviously, as one of the SpaceX investment underwriters, fee earners, and ability to make money out of SpaceX. Because if you're in the investment banking world, you don't want to miss out on the biggest IPO in history. The fees were enormous. I think it's like if you look at them, $500 million just in the documentation and corporate finance fees. And then there was the ability to get control of what's called the green shoe, the additional almost 1% of equity that was gone to all these investment banks to help them control the pool. And they were very smart too. They knew that once this thing was listed, there was not enough free float. So they've been able to leak that out, over the first few days. And probably just because of them, the share price hasn't gone up to, even higher than where it is now, because they're obviously filtering it down and they're trying to make it look as normal as possible, given the amount of stock they've got and the amount of profit that they're making out of this IPO.
It reminds me of the dot-com boom, and I was right in the middle of that. I had a company which was tiny, 5 or 6 people, but everybody wanted something to do with the internet. And we had our listing done for free. And the on the basis that we would give the investment bank some shares to place, and they could do the same thing. And of course, the share price, although it was already very highly to begin with, it doubled in the first day, on the listing day. And that was right towards the end of the boom. So it sounds to me like we as outsiders, you not, and you're really sharing some fascinating insights for us. But for most people, they look at this and they get caught up in the numbers, whereas there's a big game going on here that they don't understand.
No, I agree. I think I mean, I even saw an article this morning put out that Easy Equities had their biggest one day ever because, after the IPO, they weren't obviously given IPO stock, but after the IPO happened, Easy Equities South African clients bought over 100 million rands worth of SpaceX shares. The previous highest number was 60 million in the Boxer listing. So, the frenzy is definitely there. Um, retail clients who have got really little understanding of balance sheets, ability of businesses to make money, but rather follow the hype and the media and the speculation that's built up by Elon and his team in the media. I mean, once you control X, the previous Twitter, you almost control, what happens with the media, how the media sees SpaceX. There was a brilliant article which I can send to you independently, which is actually on Substack, an account called Quote the Raven, where it was posted on X, and it actually went into all the detail about this, about the free float, and about how manipulated it is, and how much they've been doing work on Tesla options. Well, what do you know? When you clicked on that article, a couple hours later, it was gone. So it's interesting to understand, what has happened here, and yeah, what will happen. Look, all I would say is you want to be on the right side of history. You probably want to stay long for now, based on market structure and demand, not based on fundamentals or the outlook of SpaceX.
But if Elon can do this, surely others will learn from his example.
So I've thought about that as well, and we've got two other potential listings coming now, which is Anthropic, which is a business growing at an immensely fast pace. It's probably just broken profitability now, but probably will be pretty profitable over the next couple of years, and is already, they saying, worth probably 800 billion rand, $800 billion. I'm sure people will learn from this, but I'm sure regulators will also learn from this. So, let's see. I think let's see what's happening. What will happen, I don't know.
So, what should we, the people, do? What should the Biz News tribe do? There are lots of them who, like Magnus Haystack, got themselves a stake in SpaceX by acting ahead of the time. And there are, I'm sure, many of them who bought on day one amongst those easy equity clients.
Well, look, many of the investment world here in South Africa, top asset managers globally, everyone, all have stakes in the SpaceX. I mean, it was offered to us many, many times over the years. Unfortunately, you can't buy it for your public funds because there was no listed price. You can't account for it. It's unfortunate, but many people have got stakes in this, and as a result, everyone wants it to do well, and that's the crazy thing about this. You don't really care about what's happening. This has been manufactured, and you just, your first exit. There's approximately, I think it's about 12% of the 52% that's of the 40. I think it's like 15% of something extra. An extra 6 or 7% will come on August or July, the end of July, just after earnings release, and that is 20% of all the people, excluding Musk, that were locked, or excluding employees that have taken prior rounds, over the last 20 years. So there is an additional, I think it's going to be 5.8% of the entire company. So basically doubling the free float that's coming late July. Not that everybody will sell that stock, because you have a lot of long-term investors there. For example, Google will be in that, then I don't think Google will sell. I mean, Google's just done a deal, I'm not sure if you've seen it, where they need some of the compute that the Grok business has. So effectively, they've done a short-term deal where SpaceX's data availability, the compute is so large, and they're actually not using it all. It's unutilized. So there's almost like a rental agreement between Google and XAR for that capacity. So, I don't see Google, on the other hand, selling their SpaceX that made like I don't know what the number is, $100 billion US out of this listing. So there are a lot of companies and corporates and funds and ETFs and whatever that will not sell when that first lockup comes, but some will sell. But overall, I still see the market dynamic as very bullish. Hasn't gone into the NASDAQ yet. There's going to be massive demand when that happens in the next 12 days or so. So I think what you do is, if you're a holder, you hang on. Be careful to go short, because I think that would be foolish. And if you're a Tesla shareholder, I think you may get bailed out at some stage soon by a by a takeover of by SpaceX. That's my gut feeling.
So although, and the way that you've unpacked it for us, it feels a bit like a Ponzi scheme. Just don't jump off. Don't jump off yet, because there's a heck of a lot more.
I've kind of always said that. Where I've been wrong is the fact that there's just not enough liquidity in Tesla, for example, to bring it down. And I really don't believe there's enough liquidity in SpaceX, that's for sure. I mean, you've got, Musk alone holding almost half the equity. And that's well, he's I think 800 to 900 billion at current levels just in SpaceX. It dwarfs his holding in Tesla. I mean, Tesla's become insignificant to him in value relative to the size of his SpaceX holding. Not that he can sell it, but on paper.
But it's got to affect him as a human being, this kind of thing. And we know he's been saying strange things about South Africa on the one hand. And you almost feel, as a South African, as a guy who grew up in Pretoria, he could be such a big asset for us. But wow, all of this, it's hard to see how it's going to work out. And I guess not hard to see why some in Pretoria don't want to have anything to do with him.
Well, it's actually just hard to believe that the first trillionaire in dollars comes out of Pretoria in the world. I mean, that in itself is a crazy thought. But yeah, I think people are a little bit disappointed in particularly how much he's given back to his country of origin. He's got mixed feelings about South Africa, but he is in a position where, he really could change a lot of the world with that kind of money. Not that that money is, necessarily can be realized. It's due to market structure, as I've said. So who's to know what SpaceX is really worth in the free market?
But it's got to worry you that if he can crack the code, others are going to read, learn, and you say the market is broken in these two stocks. It could be broken in many more.
Absolutely. And that's why I think regulators need to sit up and listen and work this out and see, particularly understand what's happening around the options market, and, understand the effect of passive. You can't limit passive. It's getting bigger and bigger. And it's difficult to argue against passive. Today, if you ask me, would I ever invest in an active manager in America? Long only? Never. Not the best ones there. Because over time, I think it's whatever the percentage in the last 10 years, 98% of active managers have been beaten by their passive indexes. So that you've got no, in my view, no ability to outperform. It's very different in emerging markets, and luckily it's very different in South Africa. We don't have that amount of passive making up our market, number one. And number two, the dynamics in our market are just, very, very different. We're not driven by option flow. Options are very small in our market. Stocks aren't manipulated by the option flow. So in South Africa, luckily, even at 361, we've managed to outperform the passive, over 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. And that's because, we've been able to determine on a fundamental valuation basis what is better and what is worse. and I don't think that exists that much anymore in America. Yes, you get gyrations once companies disappoint, and companies that exceed their forecasts or exceed analyst forecasts, they do go up. There's a natural implication of extra buying and extra option, but it's very difficult to base a lot of these companies, particularly SpaceX, on a fundamental basis.
But it doesn't, nothing goes up indefinitely forever. And
Well,
that's got to
what
be,
can all that can bring this down is exactly that: is the release of extra equity by locked up shareholders. So the shareholders, excluding Musk and employees are locked in for 365 days, full year. So obviously that's a big event in a year's time from the IPO. The balance of all these locked up investors who were early investors in SpaceX over the last couple of decades, those investors are staggered from the first set of results in late July, which is about 20% of their equity, to all the way to 180 days. 180 days after the IPO, the balance of those locked up investors effectively could be released. So and there's conditions, interestingly enough, about the release of part 2, 3, 4 of that. It depends on how the share price has performed, whether you can unlock additional stock. Now, I've never seen that before either. So that's another new clever trick that's been brought in on this IPO that we haven't seen before. That shareholders aren't necessarily going to have all their stock unlocked. It all depends on at certain parameters. It all depends on how the share has done. So, that's that's something that makes this, almost a laughable exercise. But at the same time, it's not like someone has been aggrieved by this. Obviously, if you went short an IPO based on fundamental valuation, well, yes, you'd be hurting right now. But besides that, it's almost is a wealth creation event. And, people don't want to really criticize it too much. If you listen to all the various podcasts in America, whether it be, the All In podcast, which is a very famous one, which I think is the most well-known one with the most followers, those individuals are highly, highly incentivized by being positive on SpaceX. David Sachs, etc., Chamath, they have massive equity in the SpaceX. They are looking to make billions of dollars each. It's not normal numbers. So this is a get-rich scheme that if you were a lucky member, you were given a look in at some stage over the last couple of decades. But this is created enormous wealth if you are able to sell it.
it's only when you actually bank the money that the wealth is really yours. And I guess that's one thing that all shareholders should be looking at. If you were a member of the public looking at the way you've unpacked it for us, would you be buying shares in SpaceX?
I don't like to give recommendations, Alec, as you know, because what I say today could change tomorrow. Bear in mind, we could have a SpaceX could say something tomorrow, but as I stand right now, I would say the market dynamics are more leading to the stock going up than down. Just because of options have just started trading. The passive indices still have to buy. I tracked some interesting stats yesterday on how many ETFs have already bought stock in SpaceX. And you've got these are active ETFs, not even the passive ones. So I think there were 30 or 40 that have been buying equity already, and I think that's very interesting because it is number 5 in the world and probably going to be higher. You have to have some kind of equity stake in it. So I think the force buy remains. But all I can caution people is don't buy this on some kind of valuation basis or you expect to get a dividend out of this. You'll never see a dividend as long as you live on SpaceX, in my view. So it's a crazy thing. And things get the regulation in America is actually falling apart to an extent because you can't make forecasts about your own business without making it publicly in the correct form with the correct forms, etc. Elon went on, the day before the listing and said, he's just posted on X that he sees that he thinks SpaceX's revenue will be $1 trillion by 2030. So we'll remember that number. I mean, the only way he gets to $1 trillion is by buying everything else that's and using SpaceX equity to fund it, to add all those businesses up. But SpaceX on its own, with its current businesses, is never making $1 trillion of revenue from 19 billion, whatever it is, last year. That's factual.
Sy Jacobs is the co-founder of 361. As always, we thank you for your forthright opinions and definitely for unpacking something that many, many members of the public have got no clue about what's really happening. So now we got to sneak behind the curtain. I'm Alec Hogg from biznews.com. Start your day a step ahead. BizNews Insider. It delivers the business stories that matter every morning straight to your inbox, sharp, fast, and free. Subscribe now. In uncertain times, good information is priceless. The BizNews Conference is heading back to the Drakensberg. Join me, Alec Hogg, from the 11th to the 14th of August for BNC 9, Champagne Sports Resort, where it all began, and where our community gathers for honest conversations, smart investing insights, and direct access to some of South Africa's sharpest minds. Come and rub shoulders with the best we've got. 28 keynote speakers, 3 days. Seats are available now. Book your seat by clicking the link in the description.